Hey, my name is Chelsea Fagan, and I'm the founder and CEO of The Financial Diet, a totally independently owned and operated company of women who love to talk about money. Welcome to The Financial Confessions, a weekly show where we talk to people about their personal finances, their professional industry, and how money shapes their lives. You can listen to or watch new episodes of The Financial Confessions every week on YouTube or your preferred streaming platform. You can also support TFD and get exclusive access to our entire catalog of ad-free bonus videos, workshops, Discord community, our book club, and more by joining our members-only community on Patreon or YouTube. Our 2024 goal is to be primarily supported by our incredible community, and joining our membership program is the best way to do that. Enjoy the episode. Welcome, everyone. Today we are in studio, which is a rare but delightful pleasure in these times of questionable pandemic protocol and people being spread out all over the country. But not only am I sitting in studio with my guest today, I am lucky enough to be sitting in studio with a guest who does not actually live in New York. She came here for leisure travel with a friend, and we managed to make it work, which I am personally excited about because she is one of probably my most potent parasocial relationships. Like, I've watched all of her TikToks. I've sent them to a million people. I absolutely love her TikToks. Now, those of you who are watching this season of the show know that we are focusing on quote unquote real people. So you might be wondering, well, why would we have someone who has a pretty substantial TikTok following on the show? Good question. The answer is that a lot of people who are on TikTok, you might just assume they all make their living just being these glamorous jet-setting influencers. And while that is true for some of them, a lot of them have actual jobs. And my guest today is someone who, in addition to talking about all kinds of topics on her channel, which we will get to, talks a lot about her experience being an ICU nurse and specifically how she makes it work best for her financially. As someone who is not at all really familiar with the profession of nursing, I am seated for those videos. I am so entertained and enthralled and interested. And nurses, and specifically the sort of optimization of finances while nursing, has been a hugely requested career topic. So when I knew that one of my favorite TikTokers also is super comfortable talking about that part of her life and sharing numbers, I knew I had to have her on the channel. So without further ado, welcome to my in-studio guest, Ryan Parrish.
Hello, I'm so excited to be here.
Genuinely, as I said, one of my top creators that I just love to watch. But for those who are not familiar with your content, can you talk a little bit about who you are and the kind of content that you make?
Yeah, so my name is Ryan Parrish. I am from Nashville, Tennessee. I currently work as a registered nurse. I've been doing that for about 6 years now. And yeah, I post all kinds of different content. It just started out as a hobby, and that's what I do on the side. But my main gig is registered nursing, just like a regular ICU nurse. So
amazing. So we'll get to nursing, but one of the biggest topics that you talk about on your channel, and why I love your channel so much. So one of my biggest pet peeves on TikTok especially is when there is a couple. One person is American and the other person is from a country that is not America, which is also my situation. And so much of the gimmick is about how they don't understand each other, or they don't speak she doesn't speak his language, or he's so baffled by all these different things she does. And you are married to, or engaged to...
It's okay. He thinks we're married. It's all that matters.
But you're engaged to a Cuban, soon-to-be, hopefully, Cuban-American man. And you're super fluent in Spanish. And a huge part of the content you create is about kind of not only understanding each other more completely, but helping other people understand, his culture, the immigration process, all of that. Can you talk a little bit about why you create the content you do around that?
I think it's very important to have I think it's really important to have an example of what it looks like to really marry your two cultures. Because so many people, just like you said, they talk about just how it's so difficult to understand each other, and they use that as kind of a point to make fun of. And really, that's not at all me and Ramone. We're both very passionate about each other, but we're very passionate about each other's culture. And I think it's also important because so many people in our country look at immigrants a certain black and white type of way, especially where I live in the South. There's kind of a lot of negative connotation around immigrants, probably more so than would be here in New York. And so by introducing Ramone and his story, my purpose with that has always been to be able to tell his story so that other people can see it and see immigrants in a different light, and see immigrants kind of how they really are, and see that, all the hard work he's put in to be in this country, to see that it really is his dream and that he is what America's all about. And so that was always my purpose, was to be able to show his story positively, because obviously it impacted me from the moment I met him. And I was very, just impressed with who he was as a person. So I wanted to be able to share that because I'm such a storyteller. So that he gives me the privilege of sharing his story on the internet is like, I love it. I'm so happy and grateful that he's done that.
I love
me
it.
To tell it, yeah.
I love also how Cuban sounding your Spanish is, at least to me anyway. It is.
Do you speak Spanish?
So, okay. So, yes. Sí. Podríamos tener esta conversación en español.
Oh,
but,
wow. She sounds Spanish, though, y'all. That's wild. Okay.
No, well, that's funny you say that. My teacher's Mexican, so I probably favor Mexican Spanish. But no, so I am obviously American. I've spoken French since I'm little, and then I've been learning Spanish for 2 years. So I feel like I'm at the point where I can say genuinely that I speak Spanish, and I can, like, I was just in Miami, I was speaking to everyone in Spanish, but I don't know about you, but I feel like the more you learn language, the more like hesitant you are to really like to overstate, if that makes sense. Because you always feel like there's so much more to learn. And like,
oh, yeah.
I feel just now like I'm able to start making like little jokes and stuff in Spanish, but I still feel so far from what it could be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, honestly, it took me probably 8 or 7 years before I would even say, oh, yeah, I'm fluent in Spanish. I speak it, because it's just like you just feel like there's so much to learn. And yeah, that was how I felt a lot when I first started. But I definitely now I am, because I do it all the time. So, because at our house, we just speak Spanish. So it's all the time, 100%. And people kind of look at me crazy. They don't realize that, like especially my nursing life, nobody realizes that I speak Spanish.
That doesn't surprise me.
Until like there's a patient that comes in and we start going back and forth and everybody's like, what? We didn't know. That's like a superpower. I love it.
It does feel like a superpower. I will say, though, one thing about your Spanish that really sticks out to me is because you did not grow up speaking it.
No.
It was not like there was no sort of, because I feel like for so many English speakers, there is this huge mental block because, first of all, like our language is the dominant one. So it's often not really required of us to learn another language. But I think there's also often, because of that lack of need to try another language, there's like a real fear and almost embarrassment of trying. And like, for example, when you speak Spanish, like you try really hard to pronounce things, I mean, not just accurately, but kind of colloquially, the way they do in Cuba or in, Caribbean Spanish. And so many people, I feel like, almost feel like, what are you trying too hard? Mm-hmm. There's that weird energy about it. And to me, it's the same thing with regards to like embracing your partner's culture. There's that sense of like, I'm okay learning and being curious. And I would love to hear kind of how learning a language in that way as a second language has kind of broadened your horizons.
The biggest thing that learning a language did for me was I stopped being afraid of embarrassing myself. Because you're going to embarrass yourself. It's absolutely, there's no question about it. You're going to say something wrong. You're going to say something that sounds weird. You're going to say something that just like doesn't make any sense, that they would never say. And it's going to be embarrassing and some people are going to laugh at you. But what you have to realize is the people that are laughing at you either A, don't speak a second language, or B, have done that before, have learned how to speak a second language, so they know where you're coming from. And it's funny because we've done it too. And so that was really that helped me in so many aspects of my life, because I stopped caring if people thought that I sounded bad, and I stopped caring if people knew that I messed up, and I just started focusing on the fact that, hey, I'm learning. It's just like a toddler learning how to walk. You don't look at the toddler like, oh my gosh, why'd they fall so much? Like, oh, that stupid toddler. You would never say that. They're just learning how to walk. So just reframing that, and it's also helpful to me because it's helped broaden my horizons when I think about how learning is lifelong. Yes. Because even though I know a lot of Spanish and I know a lot of Caribbean Spanish, like what Ramone speaks, and I've learned a lot of his sayings, I didn't when I first met him. And I knew Spanish very well when I first met him. But when I first met him, I didn't even understand a word he was saying. I was so confused. I thought I didn't even speak Spanish when I met him because he talks so fast. He says all these crazy sayings that don't make any sense when you translate them. I didn't know what he was talking about. But I had to realize, oh, this is something different. And I just have to keep learning. Now I know a lot of it. I don't know all of it because sometimes he still loses me and leaves me behind, but that's okay. But you still, it's just always learning. And if I went somewhere else like Chile or Spain or wherever, I would have to learn it there too. And so I think that makes it, you're just more curious and more open to learning and open to continuing to better yourself.
And okay with being vulnerable. I think that there's like a real resistance to vulnerability, especially again when you're from the dominant culture. Yes. Like, we're used to other people having to be vulnerable around us. I will say with Cuban Spanish, like I said, I just got back from Miami. Well, what the are they saying?
I know.
It's crazy.
It is. Yeah, I know. I promise you, when I first met him, it was constantly like, what did you say? ¿Qué dijo? ¿Qué dijiste? Like, what are you talking about? I could not understand him.
No.
And even sometimes still when he gets on the phone with his friends in Cuba, I have no idea what he's talking about. Like, I'll just hear him in the other room just going at it, and I have no idea what he is saying. But that's okay. I mean, eventually maybe someday I'll learn it all, but I doubt it.
Totally. And I will say, like, it is interesting too, because you feel like, and even after just like we were there for like maybe 2.5, 3 weeks, and even after 3 weeks, I felt already much better, confident and comfortable. And I'm like, okay, we're just not going to hear a single consonant for the next several minutes.
They ain't got no S's, nothing. You don't know. It's
nothing. But then at the very end of our trip, we watched Society of the Snow. Have you seen it?
I haven't.
Okay, it's all Uruguayan and Chilean and Argentinian Spanish. Oh, what the hell? Like, I was like, and we're back to zero.
Yep, exactly.
It's as if I learned nothing. But there's something, like you said, there's something really fun about that.
Yeah.
I will say though, like I said, my second language is French, and although I like to tell people 99% of the time when they're learning a new language, like, as you probably know, like when you're speaking to someone in Spanish, especially as a white person who they're used to, frankly, not making an effort and like expecting them to learn English and all of that, like there is a real sense of like, people are always so friendly, so welcoming, they'll help you, they'll be patient, all of that. That is not so true for French people. I feel bad for people learning French as adults, genuinely, because they will kind of be assholes to you, which is rare.
I could see that. That's also the fact that I learned Spanish, I think, makes a huge difference, because Hispanic culture in general is very accepting, very welcoming, very open, very kind, very polite. And I found that across, Cubans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, anybody from the Hispanic culture, that it's a much warmer culture. But luckily, the Hispanic people, being a white girl, I'm a cute little white girl. Of course, they love it when I'm trying to speak Spanish to them, like it's sad, but it's true. Like, they've always been very kind to me about it. But even friends I've had that have learned Spanish that don't look like me, they've had a very simple time, and people have been very kind to them too. So
that's, I think, well, so on that note, so can you talk a little bit about like how you and Ramone met, and how him being, an immigrant to the country has kind of impacted your relationship?
Yeah. So when we first met, we just met at a regular bar in Nashville. Well, it was a Latin bar, obviously. I didn't just meet him at a honky tonk. But
so he was already here.
Yeah. Okay. So he, Ramone had immigrated from, Cuba. He originally flew to Nicaragua, came up through Central America, just like a regular immigrant, got to the border in Mexico, ended up having to live there for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And then he was
Where in Mexico?
He lived outside of Eagle Pass.
Okay.
So right outside there. And he lived there for 2 years, I think, or a year and a half, while he was waiting on the immigration process, and then he was allowed to enter into the country as a political refugee.
Right.
So he sought refugee, did that, and then Cubans are actually I say privileged, some disagree, but they do have a big privilege in our immigration system, that once they are in the country for a year, they are eligible for the Cuban Adjustment Act, which comes from 1959. And they are eligible to become permanent residents in 1 year after living legally in the U.S. Yeah. So it's a very big privilege when you compare it to other, countries, like other nationalities who come, like Venezuelans or Haitians or anybody else. Even if they come seeking refugee, they will have to wait at least, 5, 10, whatever years to get their permanent residency. So when I met Ramone, he'd been here about 9 months. And it was kind of difficult at first because he didn't have a work permit. He didn't have, a driver's license or any of that kind of stuff. Like, he just was an immigrant waiting on his papers to come in, waiting on work permissions, anything to come in so that he could work legally, so that he could make his life happen. But what really impacted me was that never deterred him. Mm-hmm. Even having to, be forced to stay in Mexico for a year, he still was kind of what we say in Spanish, luchando. He was still progressing, still fighting for his dream. And even when I met him in Nashville, he was still, taking all these steps to get towards his dream. Somehow he'd bought a car with his passport. He'd done all kinds of stuff. He had just done all these things that to me I look at as, wow, that was hard for me as an English speaking person from here. Mm-hmm. And you don't speak the language, because nobody in Nashville speaks Spanish. Nobody.
I was going to say, why did he pick Nashville?
So his cousin lived there. He just ended up flying, when he had a cousin there. And when you come in as a refugee, you have to have somewhere hey, I'm going to go stay somewhere. They don't just let you into the street, So he had to find one of his cousins, and luckily his cousin welcomed into his home, and he was just in Nashville, and nobody speaks Spanish. He had to figure out how to do life, how to pay bills, how to he like rode a bike for 6 months while he was saving to buy up for a car. It was really crazy, like when I look back and I think about it. But I really saw that determination in him, and I thought that is somebody that I want to be around. Like that is somebody that is constantly learning, doesn't let anything stop them. If he knocks on the door and they don't answer, he just beats the door down. Like, he doesn't take no for an answer in the most respectful way. But, he's very, very, just a very impressive person. And that was, at the beginning, he never really let his immigration stuff affect our relationship. Mm-hmm. It was very clear from the beginning he wanted his immigration story to be his. He didn't want people to think that he was with me for a green card. He didn't want anybody to think that we were together for any other reason than we wanted to be together. And he has been very adamant and very clear about that. And it's also just his own sense of pride. Like, he's very proud of that. It wasn't an easy journey to make sure that all the paperwork was filed and all the cases were closed and everything was done correctly so he could have the best opportunities. And luckily it's paid off for him now. He's a permanent resident. And I'm so proud of him because it gets me emotional talking about it, because it was so impressive to me to watch him alongside of it, because I think so many people would have taken an easier route that would have cost them more in the long run, like done things the sketchier way or done things the easier way. But I think that because he did things so correctly, it took him longer, but it paid off, in my opinion.
Well, I'm also extremely proud of Ramone. Like, following him from TikTok, I'm just so impressed with the way that he approaches so many aspects of life. And it is really interesting to think about, especially when you immigrate from a country where, there are certain things, like my husband is from France, so there's an enormous level of privilege, even still dealing with the bullshit of immigration. I mean, he had to leave the country for 2 years due to immigration issues. So, like, you're not totally insulated from all of the, BS that can come with it, but you're still coming from, for example, visa-free travel for tourism. He's white, which is a huge privilege. He's from he's from the EU. So there are already all those levels where, like, for example, his college degrees translate very easily, things like that. Whereas, especially when you come from a situation like, for example, when I was in Miami, one of the Uber drivers I was talking to immigrated from Venezuela a few years prior and was a CPA there, and now is driving Uber and picking up odd jobs because he's learning English and he's hoping to get his certs to be a CPA again and all of that. But having to start over from that position and kind of going back to, like, the vulnerability conversation, like, Ramone as an adult having to, not being able to drive a car, having to, not speak the language, all of that kind of stuff. Can you talk about what you feel like you've gained from watching someone have that kind of, I mean, honestly, humility in the face of not being treated in a new country the way you might have in your own?
It makes me feel very grateful to have all of the privilege that I have to live here, and it makes me look at the immigration process a lot differently, I think, than I did. I knew it was hard because I've always talked to people who have done it, but when you see it and you see how hard it is to navigate and how tough it is to do it the correct way or whatever, or just even the smallest things, it's really made me grateful that he wants to, and it's made me a harder worker. It's made me not take no for an answer. It's made me think, well, if he's over here doing all this work, like, I can also, do all this work, and we can build a really great life together. And yeah, it's a lot. It just opened my eyes to so many things that he's just such an impressive person to me. He just has worked so hard, and it makes me want to work hard, and he's never afraid to do anything. It makes me not afraid to do anything at all. Like, he wants to do this, he'll get it done. If he wants to go get his little credit card at the bank, he's going to get it. Like, he doesn't, even if they tell him no, he's going to get it done, And it's very impressive. And that's also why I like to share it on TikTok, is because I know that other people find that so very impressive and inspiring. And it's made me grateful for the opportunities we do have in this country. Because I think before I met him, I was very close-minded about, it's hard when you grow up here because I see so many of the issues where I live, especially living in the South, and I'm not necessarily of the same political affiliation as everybody in the South. I have a little bit different views, especially working in healthcare and stuff. And I just saw so much negative about where we live, but having him and knowing where he's come from, coming from a communist government where, you don't have food, you don't have any opportunities, you don't have this just any way to move up social classes at all, because there's no social class allegedly, but it to me it's made me so much more grateful for our country, but also makes me want things about it to be better. So I've really had to like come to reckoning with like how I identify as an American and how I identify with the culture that we have here, because while I am upset and angry and outraged at so many things that happen here, I am also at the same time very grateful that I can even be angry or outraged or upset, because he couldn't even speak out against the government in Cuba if he wanted to, like back when he lived there, without suffering some kind of consequence or going to prison or something. So for me, it's like I'm grateful I can express that, and I'm grateful that there is some way we can change things, and that this is a country where you can really make your life, the life of your dreams, you can make it happen here if you want to. And that's not to say that it's not, there's not issues. Of course, I think there's issues, but I think I balance that a little bit better now than I did before.
Also worth noting, America does have its role to play in why things are the way they are in Cuba. Let's talk about those sanctions, babe. Because, they're certainly not helping along with the rest of the history. But speaking of healthcare, you mentioned it. And you have, your own kind of views on the system. So let's start by just establishing. So you're an ICU nurse.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about kind of what you do as an ICU nurse, how you got into it, and kind of your overall views on being a worker in the healthcare system today.
So I originally got into, I didn't want to be a nurse. My mom's a nurse. My grandma's a nurse. I did not want to be a nurse. I was like, I will never do that.
The pull of destiny is strong.
I guess. I was like, I'm not doing that. I used to hear their stories. I'd say, no, thank you. And then I went and I was interpreting. I was speaking Spanish at a clinic. I had got an in somehow to volunteer interpret in college. And I did that, and I really liked what the nurses did. I just really enjoyed what they did. I didn't like what the doctors did. I liked what the nurses did. And I wanted to do that. I thought this would be something I would really enjoy. So it just happened I was in college. I ended up getting in the nursing program, and it worked out really well and easily for me. And I did that, and then I graduated and became an ICU nurse originally. I've done travel nursing all over. And so as an ICU nurse, a lot of what I do is I take care of patients. I manage critical care drips. I manage really sick patients on ventilators, patients having huge surgeries, patients who've gone through really traumatic things. I've done a lot of general ICU, and I've worked in a lot of specialty ICUs. I've also done ER some. So I've really tried to work in all kinds of different departments and learn and grow as a nurse. Functionally, like every day, it's just me and two patients, and not just two patients. They got a lot going on, but it's me and two patients, and I advocate for them and I take care of them. I give them their meds, everything. So there's a lot of that just on a day-to-day basis. But then the healthcare system is a little bit different. I also had to have kind of a reckoning with myself working in the healthcare system, because so many parts of our healthcare system are so very flawed. And so many people can't have access to what they need. They can't get what they need, or they have to pay $50,000 to have a one-night stay in the ICU. Sure. That's, so having that, or having patients tell me, I can't get my medicine, that's why I'm here with, DKA, is because I couldn't get my insulin.
What's DKA?
Diabetic ketoacidosis. So it's like a very severe form of like when your sugar's not controlled for a long time. People will get it. Like, so they'll have all these, machines and like all this stuff going to help them get better, but they're like, oh, well, I can't afford my medicine. That's why I'm here. And so for me, like, it was kind of a reckoning, and also to have to work for a for-profit system, even though there are hospitals and private hospitals that are allegedly nonprofit, they still have to make a profit to stay in business. It doesn't matter that the profit is allegedly donated, who knows, but they still have to make a profit. And so to work in that system where your upper administration is very business minded, but you are the one that is working with the general public and seeing how that business mindset can harm the general public that I'm working with every day, that was very tough. And it was like, it took a long time for me to even be like, to find meaning within my job, because, like you really have, like I had to micro down what I look for in meaning. Like I had to find meaning in, it means something that I'm being kind to this person. It means something that in our one-to-one interaction, this makes a difference. So it was very, very tough, especially when the healthcare system can be so very harmful in America. It was really difficult for me for the first couple years of being a nurse.
We just our most recent video essay we put up last week for the January one. one of the subjects that we covered was like orthodontia and dental health and how much of a class divider it is in this country because
Huge.
even
And then it leads into worse problems. I'm sure you talked about
well,
that.
I was going to say, per your DKA mention, like one of the crazy stats is how many people, because they don't get very simple dental procedures, they end up in a lot of cases just having catastrophic dental outcomes and then just getting put on cycles of antibiotics and opioids to manage the pain instead of actually getting treatment for whatever's going on in their mouth. And that is a microcosm, obviously, and it's somewhat worse with dental care because even for a lot of people who have medical insurance, it doesn't cover dental in the same way.
Yeah.
But that does seem to be a really common theme of like, we're always getting to these catastrophic outcomes and then having to manage them there instead of even an ounce of prevention or treatment.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you see in the ICU, especially. Like, you don't see anybody in the ICU having the best day of their life. It's usually pretty, it's usually the most catastrophic day they've had in a long time, or the most catastrophic day they'll have ever. And so you see a lot of end of the road issues where they haven't got care for such a long time, or they were afraid to come in and they should have came in earlier and now they have a devastating outcome. Like people that, they may have been having a stroke or something, like, the left side of my body, I just couldn't feel it for 12 hours, but I didn't want to come in because I don't have insurance and I didn't want to wait in the ER and I didn't, and then they come in and now we can't do anything about it because it's been too long. And so that was very, very difficult to see those things up close and personal. And it was interesting because I've worked at 6 different hospitals, and it's so fascinating because at different hospitals, it's so different. Like when I worked at my original hospital, it was in a more small community hospital, and we saw those kinds of issues because our population was very, didn't make a lot of money, very, just a much more poor population. And then I took a travel contract on the west side of Nashville, which is a much more affluent area. And we didn't have nearly the kind of problems that I had at that original hospital that was in a much poorer neighborhood that was just much more fraught with issues of like addiction, like you're talking about. And, people coming in with dental abscesses that's now endocarditis or whatever, like all kinds of things. So it was very interesting because when I went to the more affluent hospital, I was like, oh, you guys don't deal with this nearly as much, do you? And then it took me a while to realize, oh, right. We're in West Nashville. Like, this is where the rich people are. Like, of course, our patient population is going to be very different,
Well, when you look at, like, the life expectancy by income, it's like...
Yeah, it's crazy.
Past a certain amount of money, like... It's like you live in a different country. Like the difference in health outcomes and longevity outcomes are on par with the difference between two countries. And we have essentially one developing country and one, on par with like, an EU or a Canada or something like that. Like if you're wealthy, you live in effectively a different country. So you deal with a lot of people on a day-to-day basis who are in really bad situations. Can you talk a little bit about, because I'm sure you've had to have some really tough conversations, deal with all kinds of the emotional, personal side of it. Can you talk a little bit about coming into the job and having to learn that skill? Because I would imagine they can train you about a lot of facts, but they can't necessarily train you on how to perfectly navigate those situations.
We as nurses, there's a saying like you can't teach somebody how to care. Like you can't teach anybody how to be empathetic. Like you can to an extent, but they have to want to learn. And so I'm really grateful that the life that like my parents, I think they raised me to be pretty emotionally intelligent for who I am. My mom being a nurse helped so much. She was very realistic from a very young age, but also very positive at the same time. And that helped a lot. And so when I came in, I think back now, I was 22 years old. I just turned 22 when I became a nurse. And I was dealing with all these huge, I was dealing with all these huge, I was. And I was out here taking care of people, saving people's lives. I look back, it's crazy. Like, wow, I had to like learn how to navigate all that stuff. But it took me on my own personal journey, I think, of having to know myself and having to become very emotionally mature, but that I couldn't do that without working on myself. Like I couldn't learn how to tell somebody, or educate people, because a lot of people have this conception that the doctor is going to come into the hospital and talk to you for a really long time. Some doctors do. Some of them are great, but a lot of them have a lot of patience. So really there's a lot of education is relied on, like nursing. The patients rely on nursing for education. So the doctor will come in and say, hey, you got this disease. here's what's going on. Here are your options. I'm going to let you think about it, and I'll be back tomorrow. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of what the doctor vibe is. And so the patient is just in shock with whatever the doctor's just laid on them. They didn't hear all the options. So then once the doctor leaves and they've had a minute with it, then they start asking more questions, usually after the doctor's gone. And I have to step in and answer that as kindly as you can. Because you really want, for me, what's always been my motivator with nursing is I want to be the best patient advocate I can. And the best way I know to advocate is by education. And by making sure that my patient feels empowered to say what they want to say, that they know that that's what they want to do, that they have all the information, that they feel very good in their decision, and that they know what the options are. Because so many people don't know what the options are. When you're in healthcare, you take it for granted that we know that you can do this and you can do that and you have X, Y, and Z options. We know those things. But patients don't know that. This is the first time they've been through something like that. So you really have to, like, for me, the way that I've been able to get through it has been knowing that it's me and my patient versus the system. It's us. Like, I want my patient to make the best decision that they can for them. And I want to provide them with that information, provide them really with that confidence of being able to say, this is what I want and this is what's going on, you know?
As someone who's been very active on the internet for the past decade plus, more years than I would like to admit, and has put a lot of my personal life out for the public to consume, I'm always thinking about how that could make me vulnerable in some ways. And it's not just people like me who have a public platform. For all of us, the data that we have just kind of lingering around the internet can have real consequences if the wrong people get a hold of it. I'm personally making an effort this year to be smarter about my tech and data habits, and that's why I'm thrilled to have our friends from Delete Me back with us for this season of TFC. As you know, all season long here on TFC, we'll be chatting with relatable guests who have dealt with or are currently going through a wide range of personal and financial issues. While many of these hardships could never have been avoided due to circumstance, it's important to do what you can to protect yourself in the situations you do have control over. That's why I personally recommend and actually use Delete Me. I remember the first time I got my Delete Me report, I was completely shocked at how many places my data had gotten to without me realizing it. I felt very vulnerable, honestly, the first time I looked at it, but after that I felt very empowered because I knew I was finally doing something about it. And as some of you might remember, earlier this year, my Twitter got hacked, so I was especially coming off of a time where I wanted to be extra cautious about my internet safety. And the report made me feel like I was doing the right thing. You don't realize how much of your information is available to scammers and people with ill intent on the internet, and unfortunately how susceptible you and your family are to identity theft and fraud. But now you can get your data removed with Delete Me. Delete Me is a subscription service that removes your personal info from the largest people search databases on the web, and in the process helps prevent identity theft, doxing, and phishing scams. Delete Me finds and removes the personal information you don't want online, and makes sure it stays off. Sign up and provide Delete Me with exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts will take it from there. Delete Me sends you regular personalized privacy reports showing what they found, where they found it, and what they removed. Delete Me isn't just a one-time service. They're always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you don't want on the internet. Take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for our listeners. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan when you go to joindeleteme.com/TFC and use promo code TFC at checkout. The only way to get 20% off is to go to joindeleteme.com/TFC and enter code TFC at checkout. That's joindeleteme.com/TFC, code TFC. How would you say that your profession and your experience has informed or changed your relationship with death and dying?
Oh, man. It makes me I think I have an awareness of it that other people don't. I think it forces me to look at the big picture all the time. Mm-hmm. I'm constantly like, wow, like because when you just see somebody's worst day every day,
yeah,
like I don't get wrapped up in it to the point where I can't think of anything else, but it's very present that I want to enjoy the life that I do have, and I want to enjoy the days that I do have, and I am so grateful. Sometimes I'll just be like laying next to Ramone in bed and think, wow, I am so grateful that I'm just here enjoying this, and it might not last forever, but for some reason that makes it even better, you know? Like, it's even better now because I know that it might not be a forever thing, but it won't. Ultimately, everything comes to an end, but like, it's made me look at things where I don't get so mad about little stuff. Because what's the point? What's the point of being upset about these tiny little things? Like, it's made me very laid back in that sense of like, I know what's important, and I know who is important to me, and I know that that's what matters, I think.
That's nice.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for that. That was a good lesson to learn early in my life, and I think that that's a lesson a lot of people don't learn until they get much, much older, until they go through things where people they know where they lose people that they love, or
they
whatever.
Start to have
their own issues.
Their own
Yeah.
issues.
And I'm grateful every day that I wake up and I'm healthy, and I know I'm healthy. Wow, isn't that a miracle? Like, I can walk and it doesn't hurt. Oh, it's beautiful.
That is beautiful.
Like, I love it.
That is very true. Well, on that note, delaying treatment because you don't have insurance, or, there's anxiety around going to the doctor, that's obviously very individualized and hard to kind of work around. But seeing so many people who reach a catastrophic point that theoretically could have been avoided at different times, are there things that you do in your own life to try and be as proactive about your health as possible?
Yeah, I go to all my appointments. I get my yearly physical. I go get my pap smear. If you're a young woman under the age of 30, you should be getting a pap smear. A lot of my friends don't do that. That makes me so mad because it's so easy. You should get all your vaccines. I get all my vaccines anytime they're available or whatever, like the HPV vaccine. That's a big one that prevents cancer. Getting COVID. I have to get COVID vaccines for work, but flu vaccinations, things like that. I make sure my parents get their flu vaccines. I make sure my parents get their shingles vaccines. Those kinds of things. Just go to your doctor if you can. And I realize I'm very privileged to be able to say that because I can go to the doctor. But, there's a lot of free services out there too. The health departments are huge providers of care that I think people underestimate. They don't think about that the health department can do all those things. But the health department can do, they can do your pap smear, they can do your vaccines, they can make sure you draw your blood work and make sure you're good. If you have diabetes, they'll check your A1C. They'll do all kinds of stuff at the health department. And I think people just don't realize that that's available to them. So a lot of what I do is like hearing about these things and like connecting people and like just hearing about certain programs or certain like clinics and stuff. A big thing so I do all these things for myself, but when I worked in the ER especially, I'd have a lot of Hispanic patients that would come in, and they'd come in late or whatever, because they wouldn't want to spend a lot of money. They'd be afraid that if they went to the hospital, they'd get deported or that we were going to report them to ICE or whatever. And a lot of what I did at that job was like just kind of silent, not silently, but I would give them resources to clinics that I knew of that spoke Spanish that were free. And so I did a lot of like, hey, this clinic right here, let me see your phone, let me look it up. You can go there and they will offer you service. They're not going to call immigration on you. They're not going to call the police, but you have to like go and get these things done, because it was just like, they didn't know that those were even options to them. And I see that a lot in just my regular population, my English-speaking population. People have no idea that there are some services available if you meet the criteria, and you can just go and get your stuff done like you need to.
I think that's a really important thing for us all to remember. Not totally dissimilar from people not realizing how much is available for free at your library. I feel like free resources get so ignored. We're in such a we put such a premium on things that are material consumer goods that we forget that there is, for as many things as this government doesn't fund, they do fund a fair amount of free services and resources. Also, as it pertains to preventative stuff, I don't know about you, but I'm like obsessed with learning about longevity, in terms of like, not just like culturally, countries where people live for a really long time, but like learning about people who live to be 90, 100 plus, what do they have in common? And something that's always so interesting to me is when you look at the bell curve of people who live really long in general, and this is kind of cross-culturally, cross all different kinds of factors. I think people often have a perception about health and fitness and stuff that it has to be this extremely dedicated, proactive thing. And you actually notice when you look at the bell curve of health outcomes that there's a very clear people who are extremely sedentary and then people who are really intense athletes. They're kind of, neither of them have great outcomes in the long term. And the people in the middle who have who are generally quite active, but in a very passive way, they walk a lot, they garden, they, will do physical activities that are part of their everyday lives. They just kind of stay busy. It's like the old man in jeans walking around your neighborhood every morning. Those are the people that typically live for a really long time. And I think part of our health and wellness culture that's so focused on fitness and wellness being this sort of separate thing from your day-to-day life is to me a real misconception.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. I totally agree, because I think just staying moving. It's like that saying, an object in motion stays in motion. I 100% believe that about your body. You have to just keep moving and make good choices, and not, I'm not saying you have to limit your whatever you eat or whatever, but just be conscious about it, and don't limit yourself in how much you enjoy things either. There's just such a moderation. Moderation is something I think that we lose sight of, especially with the new year, people starting new diets and new everything and new lifestyles, but like just moderation, man. You got to be able to maintain it, and you got to be able to enjoy your life too.
Well, okay. So on the note of, you mentioned that you are an ICU nurse, you used to be an ER nurse, you're a traveling nurse. Can you talk a little bit about what you make as a nurse and how you kind of optimize to, maximize the income that you get per time worked?
Okay. So when I started as a nurse, some of y'all are going to faint at this. I was 22 years old making $21 an hour. I thought I was making so much money. This was in 2018. I thought I was rich. But it was $21 an hour. And I had
as
to
an
work,
RN?
Yeah, as a registered nurse. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, see, yeah, it was especially up here. It was real wild. They pay better now, but just barely. But it was $21 an hour, and again, I thought I was making so much money. But, of course, looking back, I'm like, that really wasn't that much, Ryan. You just were making more than you were. But I was working at a job, and one of the girls that I worked with, one of the other nurses, she had left the job. I think I knew her somehow, and she had left around 2 years before I started. And then she came back to the job, and she had started at the same time with another nurse I worked with. The nurse that didn't leave was making $23 an hour. Ooh. Well, when the other nurse came back after she'd left and gone to a different hospital, she started out making $28 an hour. So she was making $5 more than somebody who had stayed loyal to this hospital, who had never left, who was working as a charge nurse, who was doing all this extra education, precepting, teaching new nurses how to be nurses, really going above and beyond. But somebody who left came back and made $5 more an hour. I will never forget that, because I learned in that lesson that loyalty in the hospital is not going to pay. And I learned that I really had to unlearn what my parents had taught me, because my parents, were born in the 60s. And they had the idea that if you stay at the same place, well, eventually loyalty pays. You'll get a pension. You'll get a good 401k. You'll move up the ladder if you work there. You'll have so much respect. You'll have all these opportunities because companies take care of their workers. And really, in nursing, that has never been the case. Not since I've been a nurse. Now, I don't know exactly when that changed, from when my mom was a nurse to when I became a nurse, but it has dramatically changed. Even from my mom had a pension at the same hospital I was at, but do they do pensions when I started working there? No, they didn't offer that. That was long gone, So I unlearned that you have to stay at the same place and loyalty will be rewarded, because it's not. And so I ended up, after my first year of nursing, I ended up going what we call PRN, which is per diem as needed. So I lost my benefits, but what I did was I got a pay raise up to $35 an hour, and I was actually required to work less. So I only had to work 7 shifts a month instead of 12.
Oh, wow.
So I was like, why would I not go PRN? So I went PRN, and then after a year of doing that, I went to a float pool position, which just meant that I floated all over the hospital to different units. Which I liked that too. That gave me a lot of versatility. It changed up the days.
Sounds dynamic.
Yeah, and that went up to $50 an hour. That was premium, which in Tennessee at that time, I was making more money than my mom was at the time.
Yeah.
And she'd been a nurse, whatever. I mean, of course, I was doing a much harder job than she was doing. Yeah. But still, she was in shock that they even offered that as a program.
So how long was that between $21 and $50
That was 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah.
You doubled your income.
Yeah, and a lot of that was also,
that.
Exactly. And and I was really thinking I was making a lot, because it was almost $100,000 a year if I worked full time, which was always my goal. I think it was 93 or something. And I also realized that you have to make the most of the hours that I worked. Yes. So, for example, in nursing, they give you shift premiums. So if you work a night shift, you get, some places it's like 10% of your pay. Some places it's $3-4 extra an hour. So I would, make sure that when I was working the shifts that were paying the most on the weekends and at night. So I would make sure that the hours I was working, I was making the most money that I could. Yeah. Or if, because I was only required to work 7 shifts a month. Well, let's say they have they need a nurse 5 days next week. Well, I'll just work 5 days next week. I'll work 3 days here. I'll work 2 days at the end of the week. Well, those 2 days are overtime. So that means next week, I don't have to go in if I don't want to. You know, I don't have to go back until the end of the month. So there was a lot of like learning little things like that so that I could really maximize the money I was making for the time I was putting in. And I did a lot of that second year when I was in the float pool. And it was also really just who I knew. Like people underestimate the power of networking, but being a good nurse, working, you know, where people know that I was safe, they knew I was trustworthy, they knew that I was a good nurse. And I was also very friendly with people. I'd be like, hey, like, what's up? Like, who are you? Who do you work with? People liked working with me. Mm-hmm. And so that provided me a lot of opportunities. You know, like, I met one of the managers of the float pool and I said, hey, like, I'd really like to join the float pool. She said, oh, well, when you get your 2 years, you can come on. And so she was very, you know, just very open to that and very open to like, you know, kind of like helping me up the corporate lattice work that I was working up at the time.
Wow.
Yeah. And I remember like, I thought $50 an hour, I thought, wow, this is like the best job. I will never leave this. Like, this is so good. And then COVID happened. And I was like, I got to get out of here. I could make more doing something else, working less. Like, I need to move along. It was interesting.
So now what is your effective salary in a year?
Right now, I think it's 100. My base right now is 116.
Wow.
But I'm back in more of a full-time position right now. But it's only 36 hours a week. But it's 116,000, and then I get 10% at night, and I get like 25% on the weekends.
So you're probably netting out closer to like 130, 140
yeah. Mm-hmm.
For not even a full-time job.
Exactly. Yeah. It's because they pay me like it's full-time. They pay me 40 hours, but it's 36. And it's very flexible with scheduling when you think about it. You know, as a nurse, like you could work Thursday or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then you wouldn't work again until the next week, Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Because you do 12-hour shifts?
Yes, exactly.
Do you do the night?
Sometimes I do, yes. Right now I'm on nights, but I also learned that if I could be flexible, I was much more valuable to the hospital.
Yes.
So if I was willing, sometimes with my manager, I'd say, hey, like, you know, she'd say, I need somebody on day shift next week. I'd say, okay, well, I can go to days. And that meant that she was always, you know, offering me the, you know, not the better shifts, but she knew that I was dependable. And so if there was ever opportunities for overtime, she'd come to me because she knew that I was more flexible with her. And it was also good for me because then I could turn around and go, hey, like, I need next week off or I need this day off. And she'd say, oh, yeah, Ryan, you always help us out. Of course, we'll, you know, flip it around for you or whatever. Like I learned a lot those first 2 years of just how to be a good employee, but also how to make sure that I was getting what I needed out of the job.
Yeah.
And not just letting them run me over, you know?
Now, are you the primary earner in your household?
Yeah, between me and Ramone, yeah.
In terms of, now, you do not have to answer this, but out of curiosity, have you guys thought of having children in the future?
Yeah.
Do you have plans, or have you started to think in terms of, because I imagine a lot of people watching this who are either nurses with children, nurses who are thinking about having children, or moms who are thinking about being nurses. Obviously, so much of what makes you valuable and flexible, is that flexibility. Have you guys thought about how you would want to navigate you being the primary earner and also potentially a parent?
Yeah, I think Ramone wants to be Ramone wants to be rich. He thinks he's going to be rich. So,
and I believe he will be.
I think so. I'm riding on those coattails right now, but I think it's also, we're very realistic with our income. Like right now, me making $119,000 or $116,000 a year, that's good money. And, you know, I like it. I have no problem. But also, we don't spend nearly that much. Like,
so you save a lot.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We could definitely survive off if I was only doing $50,000 a year.
Okay.
Like, and we'd be fine. So I think that there's a lot of that too, and a lot of just us making smart financial decisions. Like, neither one of us has credit card debt. I'm very grateful. I don't have any student loan debt. I went to a very cheap college where I'm from, so luckily I was able to pay for that with scholarships, and then just I think like one semester I paid for out of pocket. It was very affordable. We don't have any car payments. We both drive like little Hondas that, you know, it's a nice little Honda, whatever, but we drive little Hondas. We don't spend any more than we need to. And we spend money on things we want, which is like traveling. We want to travel. We want to see the world. So we do things like that. But also realistically, I think eventually we know that when we settle down and have kids, that's going to look totally different in that way.
Right.
So it'll be a little bit different in terms of our spending, you know?
So you're kind of looking at this as like, this is the time where I can maximize my earning potential.
Yes.
I can be that ideal employee.
And what we're trying to I think what me and him are both, he's working towards building a business. That's his whole thing. And I'm working towards, I want to build things that make me money in the meantime while I have this time time where I'm making so much money. So I'm, a big example I have is during the pandemic, the nurses were making a lot of money in some places. Like there was a job I was making like $4,000 a week. Very good money. But I knew that that wasn't going to last at the time. COVID, obviously, the reimbursements from the government were going to end. The hospitals, it wasn't going to be a big thing. There was going to be a surplus of nurses eventually. I ended up using that year where I made almost $200,000 that year. I took a big chunk of that money and I bought a second house because I had a first house. Yeah. So, okay. Yeah.
So you own two houses?
Yes. Yeah. Well, me and the bank, but yes, we have them together. So it worked out really, yeah. So my first house it was a family house. I still had to buy it for my family, but it was a family house. I bought it. It was very simple. I was living there through college. And, that all worked out. I bought it when the rates were low. Well, then I got these big paying jobs and I really enjoyed my moment. Like I saved up a lot from this job. I was able to have a pretty good down payment and I went and I bought another house, which is where me and Ramone live. We kind of bought the house together. It's in my name, but it's our house now, And so that's what I did because I wanted eventually that original house that I had bought. It was, my whole family, my brothers were like, what are you doing living in that house? Like, why don't you go do something else? Like, you could buy any other house you want. And I was like, no, this is my dream. Like, you have to listen. This house it's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house. It's going to be great to rent out someday. That's my plan. Like, I want to be able to do that. And then somehow I turned around, my grandma lives in it now. She wanted to move back in that wild. Yeah, I was like, it just worked out. Like, it's all worked out very well. But I really have used this time, like, putting money into IRAs, learning about 401ks, learning about just like so many different things and so many ways to spend my money to make more money, And so that's been very, I think, what this part of our life looks like right now is I think building those systems and building those businesses so that someday we don't have to work so much or I don't have to make, my main income be from nursing. My ideal nursing job would just be 3 days a month. Like, I would love it. I like being a nurse. That's very controversial. A lot of people are like, oh, we hate this. I'd never do it again if I didn't have to. But I like it. I just like the freedom of it. I want to be able to just do it 3 days a month. When I come in, my cup is full. I'm like the best nurse on earth. And then I come back next month for 3 more. Like, that's it. And I want that. That would be my goal.
Well, on that note of people not liking it, so one thing I love to do in life is read Reddit drama about industries I'm not involved with.
Oh, is that your thing? That's funny.
I mean, listen, I have many things.
I'm deep on the reality TV Reddit, but go ahead.
Okay, wait. Do you watch The Real Housewives?
No, I'm going to next. Utah. They say to start with Salt Lake City. That's what my friend said. That's the best. Anyways.
Ooh, controversial. I disagree. But I think I've actually not seen Salt Lake. It's one of the few I've never seen. But I've heard it's very good. And I will be tuning in to my Bravo heads that watch. But so on one of the franchises, there's a really big drama going on right now with a nurse anesthetist, and it is spilled over into many nursing / doctor subreddits. And following, so basically she is not, no one's a fan of this new woman for many, many reasons. But one of the things she did was like very much misrepresent her credentials. Mm-hmm. And like she kept referring to, and so this initial drama on the show spilled over into me like spending a good 10 hours when I was sick one day on the different subreddits reading about this drama, because basically she had like posted something that was like referring to physician anesthesiologists or something. And then this doctor subreddit posted and they're like, we are sick of this, blah, 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 blah. Like there's no such thing. If you're an anesthesiologist, you are inherently a physician, blah, 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 blah. And I was like going deep in the lore, and like apparently there's quite a bit of tension between the nursing community and the doctor community.
Oh, yeah.
About all different kinds of things. But notably, I think from what I have pieced together in my Reddit journey, a lot of it seems to be about nurses feeling deeply underpaid and disrespected for the amount of work that they do compared to doctors.
For sure.
Tell us about, what's your take on the situation? Inform us of the drama and your opinion.
Oh, okay. Well, I think, nursing historically has been very female-driven profession.
Right.
And doctors is mostly male. The majority of them are males, and they have been historically. And I think that plays a lot into it as well.
Yes.
And I know that in the past, the relationship was a lot worse than it is now in terms of like just doctors were like, in the past, they were very rude. Like they got treated badly by the doctors that taught them. And so then they would come in and treat nursing staff badly, treat them like they were servants. Not all doctors, of course, but it does kind of, I think that the whole system of healthcare is so very toxic. Sometimes like the system is just a system that doesn't work. And I think that so many people don't know how to just feel very morally defeated by that, and then that spills into their interactions with others. And I think that that's a lot of it. And a lot of people in healthcare, to be honest, get a lot of their identity and self-worth from what they do.
Right.
Doctors do it, nurses do it, anesthetists do it. It's where you feel your identity is very wrapped up in how I serve these, how I serve this population, how I do all these great things. And that's where they get a lot of their like ego is from. And so then when you come into situations where you have to work as a collaborative team, I think that that rubs people the wrong way very different, a lot of times. And I think that that's what a lot of it is, because some people think there's like this hierarchy. And nowadays it's a little bit better with more teaching hospitals and more residents coming in, and the younger generation is a little bit less like that, I think. But I think there's always going to be some kind of tension there of like, where the doctors think that they know exactly what's best, but the nursing disagrees. And, there's also like an element of the nursing is the one that does the job. So it's like the doctor writes the order and, they have a lot of responsibility and they get compensated very well for that. But like, I'm the one over here actually doing the work, like, and then that I think can cause a lot of just animosity in general. And especially in places where nurses aren't well compensated. Like California, they're very well compensated, but other areas of the country, they're not. And it's hard, I think, as a nurse sometimes to see that, and I'm not saying that what doctors doing, that they don't deserve the money they make. They go through a really intense schooling. Of course they deserve it. They're very intelligent. A lot of them do a great job. But I also think that it just reminds you that the situation you're in, that like, that you wish you had more for what you did. You wish you had more recognition. And there's just like a big element of that, I think, as well.
It reminds me a lot of another subreddit deep dive I've done, which is in academia, where you have like tenured professors, and then of course you have the administration in a lot of these schools, and then you have like the student teachers, the adjunct, the like, the people who end up, having to take on an enormous amount of the actual day-to-day grunt work.
Yeah.
Who are paid a fraction of the amount, who have very little protections around their jobs, who, all that kind of stuff. I think you're right also that the gender component has to play a huge role in it.
Especially in the way that the model was developed. I think it definitely does. And I think that that's also probably why nursing is not taken as seriously as a profession. It's like, nurses and teachers are female-driven professions. Historically, they've been undervalued, and it makes total sense.
Well, I think in the medical profession in general too, you can have such a mixed bag of experiences.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Like you can either have someone who's like an angel temporarily sent to earth to guide you through one of the most difficult times in your life, or you can have someone like gaslighting you about your body.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. Yeah. And there's also like, just like here recently I made a TikTok about male nurses. It was making fun of male nurses.
Why?
Because like they always get the most compliments from patients.
Oh,
like if you read like the end of the week recap where they talk about the nursing compliments for the week, it's always like this one male nurse. And it's funny because like usually in my experience, this nurse will like, he does the least nursing actual work. Like, yeah, he's cool with his patients, like he talks to his patients, he gets his job done, but like the room will be a mess, the patient's a mess. You know what I mean? Like it's just, and it's, so I made a little joke about it, and it wasn't that bad. And a lot of the nurses were agreeing. Like a lot of the male nurses were like, you're right, I do get, more credit. Patients do like me more. And people, the discourse underneath was really interesting. And what someone had said was that women are expected to be empathetic and kind and caring and mothering and nurturing. Men are not. So when a man comes in as your nurse and is very kind and empathetic and nice to you, you already view him very differently than you would as a woman coming in, because you expect a woman to do that. But you don't expect a man to, so you're flattered that a man is doing that. Does that make sense?
It totally does. It's very much of a pair with just, we're celebrating, we're throwing a freaking parade for a man doing the bare minimum with his children.
Yeah, it's giving, your kids' birthdays? Wow, what a good dad.
Okay. Literally the other day, I swear to God, I hope you're not watching this. If you are, I adore you. You know I adore you, but I had to call you out in the moment for it. I'm going to mention it again. I was with a male friend who mentioned another male friend of his who is separated from his wife, and they share a child, and the mom and child live in another city, and he has to work in New York City, which fair happens.
Yeah.
But my friend was like making a point of the fact that like this friend of his, like, every single, like, whatever day he doesn't work, he's on the first plane to wherever the kid is to go visit the kid and spend the time he has with that kid, which I think amounts to a couple days a week, maybe 2 days a week. He finished that story and I was like, bud, like,
if a mom was doing that,
if a woman was doing that
they
with her
would judge her
child,
so hard.
Oh my God.
I'd be like, what kind of mom doesn't want to be? I would say, like, what kind of mom doesn't want to be with your kid? Like,
but the thing is that, like, I would feel that way about anyone.
Yeah.
Like, it's
like,
not,
yeah,
if
yeah.
you have to, listen, I understand, like, my husband, his father was a military doctor. He was away for 8-9 months at a time. No getting around that. But it's certainly not something to be celebrated that the other 3 months he comes home. Like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
But the way that we approach men doing anything remotely emotionally intelligent is like, it's like when a dog learns a really impressive trick.
Yeah, no, it's like they just, and it blows my mind, and you see it so much in nursing, I think. And that's why I think, in general, nurses feel like, oh, if you have a male nurse, they're going to get so many more compliments. They're so much more memorable. And I think it really just boils down to our patients aren't used to men being nice and kind and caring towards them. So it's very flattering. Like, especially what patients will do, just like, for the smallest amount of positive male attention, like it's like fills their cup.
On the flip side, I have mentioned this before, but I like specifically seek out as many male like doctors, therapists, like whatever as I can, because I don't perceive them as being as real. Like, it almost makes it like the experience, like I'm able to, because I have a lot of anxiety about going to a doctor or whatever. Okay. So like if I'm going to a dentist and it's a man, I feel like I don't like connect with him emotionally, if that makes sense.
That's
so
wild.
I can like sort of mentally blank out during the process.
That's wild,
like I don't
only
care.
go to women.
A lot of people do.
A lot of
people do. And I totally understand
I want to
why.
relate. I want to get in. I want to relate. I want you to understand where I'm coming from. I want you to validate me.
Like, I want to feel like I'm in a video game and this is not really happening,
Yeah. Well, I could see that if you were really anxious about it. I'm not. I'm just like, look, I want you to hear what I got to say, and I want you to listen to me, and that's that. And I feel like in my experience, the women doctors that I see do that a little bit better.
I totally agree. They totally do. And they deserve all of their flowers. But, especially for the dentist stuff. Because I'm like, I'm just trying to emotionally be somewhere else.
And the dentist. Yeah, I think one of my dentists is a dude. But he's fine. I only see him for 5 minutes. The hygienist is in there the whole time.
So if you were to give advice to someone who is considering getting into nursing from a financial perspective, it sounds like your biggest piece of advice is loyalty doesn't pay.
Oh, yeah, for sure. If you want to get into nursing, the biggest thing I can say, loyalty to a job, to a hospital, to a manager, it will not pay you. You have to move hospitals, or you have to move positions, or you have to move specialties. Like when I was, even I did it. I went down to ER. Like I had a side job in the ER, and then I worked ER exclusively for 6 months. Did full time down there. I just was going where the opportunities were. And it's also, I think a lot of that would be my biggest advice, is moving jobs within the private sector and being open to moving jobs and not being afraid of learning something new or feeling stupid if you're in a new job, because that was like kind of scary to some, it's kind of scary to me at first when I started moving to new jobs. But another big thing is your network. Nursing it's a huge profession in the country, but it's very small wherever you work at. Nurses know each other. And so you want to leave a good impression. You want to do a good job so that someday when somebody has a job opportunity, you want to be able to say, oh, like, who would be good at that job? Ryan would be good. Let me forward that resume to her. Or let me forward that job posting to her and she can send me her resume. Nice. Yeah, no, because that's what you want. And you want to I'm a relationship person. Like I love like friendship relationships, just like I'm very extroverted. And so I've gotten so many opportunities because of who I know in the nursing community, of just like one time I sent one of my friends a job posting and he sent it back to me and said, oh, that is a good job posting, but I'm actually applying at this hospital. They have this program. Do you want me to send your resume over to the manager? And I was like, yeah, that'd be great, please. And that's how I got that job. You see what I mean? Like, it's just like, you have to be able to be willing to pull other people up with you, but also because then you can turn around and get opportunities from them as well. And because I don't believe some people have the belief that if you give to others, you have less yourself. Yes. And I don't agree with that. I want to pull up the other people that are good with me. I want to give back to the people that have given me opportunities. I want, my friends to do better. I want people that I've worked with who are good nurses to work where I'm working at, or to know about these opportunities. Even if I can't enjoy the opportunity, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to. or just because I'm over here making 50 an hour or whatever I'm making, then that doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to too. So
I think that I would describe it as like the most valuable role you can play in any industry is being a facilitator, being someone who connects, someone who refers, someone who, like you're saying, even if it doesn't directly benefit you, I think it always comes back one way or another.
Yeah, I think so.
Also, the being a people person, I think so often when people have really negative experiences with healthcare workers, it's like people who like got into the profession for reasons other than wanting to help people, or like they don't even seem to like people. Like I won't say who. We can cut that. No, I have someone I know who became a doctor and like very clearly does not like people.
Yeah.
And is like, likes the money, likes the prestige, likes the kind of doctor that they are, but like doesn't like dealing with patients. And I always think, because I only know them through the context of not being their patient, but in my mind, I'm like, there's no way that's like a pleasant experience.
Oh yeah, for sure not. Yeah. And I know there's a lot, and I think a lot of people get into it for the wrong reasons. And there's a huge discourse on TikTok all the time about, of course, like I get paid for being a nurse. Like why else would, like kind of saying like that we should be paid more. But sometimes people conflate that with we went into it for money.
Right.
And that was I never went into being a nurse for money because I didn't even know you could make this kind of money as a nurse. Like I just went into it thinking, oh, that's what I want to do. But, at the same time, you can still be a good nurse and have gone into it for money. But then there's some people that I'm like, man, like this is a very forward-facing, public-facing job. Yeah. Like you need to care about people. I cannot teach you how to care. You have to be able to like care,
Well, I also think this is the same thing with teacher stuff because like most of the women in your family are nurses, mine are all teachers, and like talk about a profession where people use the fact that you should go into it for the right reasons as like a weapon.
Yeah.
In terms of like, well, that means you should be okay, like earning minimum wage.
Exactly. Aren't you cool making that like, $1,000 every 2 weeks? Like, aren't you cool with that? Because you went into this because you love it. And I'm like, well, yeah, I love it, but also I don't see you doing it. Like, like you ain't out here knocking down the door of the nursing school to come do what I do. Like, in fact, most people are like, I could never do that.
No.
So it's like to hear that. It is a big weapon that people use against the profession. I'm like, oh, you should love it. You should want to do it. And it's like, yeah, I do love it, but I also love being able to have my time off and be able to have money and be able to not be worried about, where my next paycheck's coming from. Like and all those kind of things are very valuable too. And I think that a lot of times it is used very harshly as a weapon against nursing to try and underpay us.
Especially because it's mostly women.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think 100%.
Women should always be in it for the love of the game.
Yeah.
Never the love of earning a living wage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As a last kind of practical question for people who are thinking of getting into nursing, you obviously are a nurse in Nashville, which is, although it's a smaller city than like a New York or a Chicago, it's still a pretty big city. Would you say that there is a level of strategy to geographically where you place yourself, and what is your recommendation there?
Yeah, 100%. If you work on the West Coast, you're going to be paid very well, very, very well. Ooh. The West Coast has a lot of unions, nursing unions.
Okay.
And they negotiate very high paying contracts out there, and it's very good. So I know nurses that work in San Francisco or in LA that make $150,000, $160,000, $170,000 a year.
Wow.
Because they're treated well. They have a union. They have a union rep. They get breaks. They have I think when I worked in LA as a travel nurse, I got a 30-minute break and then a 45-minute break.
Nice.
For 12 hours. And you think I ever got a break in Tennessee? No, I never.
Wait, I'm sorry. Wait, one break in 12 hours?
No, sometimes not even that. But yeah, you just get one 30-minute break in 12 hours. That's it. That's all you're legally entitled to. Tennessee is an employer state. Tennessee is
right
not.
To work.
Oh yeah, right to work.
Oof.
You got to you work yourself right to death. Is what that means. That's how that is.
That is wild. You're not even one break. How do you eat your meal?
Yeah, you sometimes you do, but it's very, very lax. There's not the uninterrupted. You know how when I didn't know all these things. Imagine me, young Ryan. This was 4 years ago, I guess 4 years ago now. Went to California, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you get a break," and I was like, "Oh, I get a break," and they're like, "Yeah, leave your phone here. Here's the break nurse, just a nurse that only does breaks, goes around and gives everybody their break." I was like, "This is amazing! Wow!" It was just so much less stressful. So they get 30 minutes, and they get 45 minutes later. And, a lot of them will take a nap for their 45 minutes. It was really cool especially coming from Tennessee where I never had that ever. Never. It was always, I'm going to go scarf down my food at the nurse's station. If anything pops off, come get me. Yeah, because that's just how it was. And so if the West Coast is a really anywhere that has a high union density is better as a nurse, because you want someone that you want to be able to collectively bargain with your hospital.
Of course.
And you get treated better in terms of you get better patient assignments. The patients, it's a lot less dangerous. The patients, it's more safe. Anywhere that you can be represented by a union is very good. So the West Coast is usually better.
How's New York?
Honestly, I'm not that familiar with like it up here. Chrissy Ciarna, she used to tell me a lot about it, but I don't remember anymore. But
New York nurses, weigh in the comments. I'd love to hear.
yeah, I really don't know. I know that there's some unions. I don't know if it's as strong as it is, because like in California and Oregon and Washington, it's a stronghold of unions over there. They're all getting treated good, and they'll make good money. And they get pensions, they get, the whole shebang, everything. So if you really want to be a nurse working in California, and it's also nice because when I went out there, I came back to Tennessee, and like I brought that with me of like, hey y'all, just this doesn't have to be so bad. Like we don't have to get so used and abused and exploited like we do here. And you kind of like
start a union in Tennessee.
No, for real. Yeah, there's people out there talking about it. My Tennessee nurses, you really should get together and do it. I couldn't do it because I was just like on contract there. Like I was just a little, whispering in ears like, hey, just so y'all know, there's a better way out there. I'm here for a good time, not a long time. So y'all gonna have to do the work, but it's better out there, I promise.
Well, on that note, it was an absolute delight speaking with you.
Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here and have had a great conversation with you.
What a pleasure. So if people are like, and I know they all will be, they're going to be like, where can I get more of this content? And your amazing nails. You do nail art too.
I know, yeah.
It's
been a while, but I do, yeah. I like to dabble in hobbies. I'm a dabbler, Piddle paddle around, we say.
Where should they go to find your content?
You can find me on TikTok at Ryan P. That's me, RyanNPDATS, me. And then same thing on Instagram.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, and be sure to tune in next week for an all-new episode of The Financial Confessions. The Financial Confessions is created by The Financial Diet and hosted by me, Chelsea Fagan. It is produced by Alexa Brooks-Major and Holly Trantham. Recording and editing by Emily Fisher, and music and sound effects are from Epidemic Sound. Want more of our content? Head over to our YouTube page, The Financial Diet, to see our monthly deep dives, videos of this show, and our entire backlog of videos and podcasts. I'll talk to you next week.